became rooted in the European cultural world. For the last 2,300 years, since the time of Plato, people have thought in terms of a partition between body and mind. Now ask yourselves, all of you speak Indian languages, and you know Indian literatures, ask yourselves if you can find anywhere in India that kind of division between body and mind. What do you think? Yeah, Sthula and Sukshma is a nice idea. In other words, Sukshma would be some kind of very subtle kind of thing, and Sthula would be some material concretization of it, a kind of thing. Yeah, maybe. That's a thought. But is that body and mind?
Well, if Manas and Chetana are both ideas that Chetana is placed within the realm of Manas, certainly comes up for redefinition with the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
And it's contemporaneous with the divisions that you're talking about.
Let's think about let's think about the Gita. Gita, we all know it's complex book with many ideas in it. But the major program is Sankhya Yoga. So Sankhya Yoga looks to us as if it had some kind of dualistic system, as if there was a dualism built in. And we know what the terms of the dualism are. There is Purusha and Prakriti. But this is not the dualism of mind and body. Everything that we think of as mind, intellection, thoughts, feelings, emotions, all of these things, concepts, all of this is in the Gita and in Sankhya. So actually it's not a very, at least it's not a very good parallel. Of course we have words for mental processes like Chaitanya. That is true. And we have words like manas and buddhi and so on. Again, I want to say, ahankara, buddhi, manas, all of these are part of Prakriti in the Sankhya Yoga. I think that the body-mind division is actually foreign to the Sankhya. In fact, I think it's mostly foreign to South Asian systems of thought generally. Mostly foreign. Although I agree that there is, of course, a continuum between things that are less, less material or less embodied or less concrete, and those that are more so. That is so on. But let me just. I hope you can see that there's a kind of a problem here. It's a problem for us in the course of the next discussion, because this is something that we'll be asking ourselves again and again. I think that there does come a moment in South Indian history when a notion of mind.
Is it people at the back complaining that they cannot hear?
They can't hear. Maybe I need a microphone.
I need a mic.
Is there one?
That's the problem. I don't think they have one.
Yeah, I think I can climb a step.
I think maybe, I would suggest just come in a little closer.
You'll be able to hear me.
Sure.
Yeah. My back.
And if you guys can't hear, just stop, just stop there. Vinayak, mic, hello.
We have to organize an
Okay.
We would need it.
Just pitch a bit, David, and if you guys can't hear, then you please tell David.
There are one or two seats.
So again, come forward. Yeah, I don't think that most of the seats are taken. Anyway, I think.
All right, I hope so. Does this help a little bit now that I've come up a little better?
This is fine.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I wanted to say this is in kind of anticipation of what will happen next week, the kinds of topics that will come up next week. I believe that there is a moment in South Indian history when we can use mind, where it means something quite different from the entire sort of psychophysical complex, where it has an integrity of its own. But I think the moment happens very late, around the 15th and 16th century. And I've argued that in my books. Will be examining materials together, and I think you yourself will be able to see. For the earlier materials, it's rather difficult to talk about mind as something separate, whereas in these late medieval or early modern materials, the first time we begin to see some kind of which does perhaps somehow correspond to this Western notion of the mind. Okay? I'm going to say it again. The notion that there's a mind-body division, a kind of tremendous fragmentation or splitting in the entire persona, that's a Greek idea that became dominant in Europe. And from Europe, it's also migrated to other parts of the world, including South Asia. It takes a long time for anything like that to appear in English. I'm to be arguing that at least in the earlier materials, in the Tamil phase, we might be better off to talk about something like the inside of the person. And there's a word for that in Tamil, in Old Tamil, Ullam. Ullam, those of you know Tamil know Ullam. Ullam today actually in Tamil can often mean something like the mind, but in Old Tamil, Ullam means everything that is inside of us. Everything that is inside of us includes all kinds of things. Fantasy, wishes, desires, dreams, feelings, above all feelings, that inner world. So today and tomorrow we'll be talking mostly about Ullam and trying to characterize it, a sense of it, see if we can understand it. Afterwards, we'll see what happens in South India. Once we start talking about the mind, start talking about the mind, there's a set of 5 elements. Better look at my list of them. There's 5 questions that will always have to be answered. I'm going to mention these now, and I'll come back to them, I promise you, in the course of these talks. Okay? There are at least 5 basic, recurrent questions. So, first of all, we want to know, what is this thing that we're talking about, this inside world, or this mind if it becomes a mind? What is it? Although we have to be careful and remember that it's not a thing. It's not an object, the way other objects might be. So what is it? What is this subject? And what parts does it? This is all part of the same first set of questions. What parts does it have? And how are they put together? Is there some kind of hierarchy among these parts? How do they relate to one another? This has to be some kind of dynamic and analytical model. Okay? So what is it that we're talking about? What is it? And what parts does it have? That's first. Secondly, there's a question about knowing and perceiving. How does this subject know things? And how do we know something about it? How does it perceive things? What is the nature of that kind of mechanism of thinking, perceiving, and knowing? So there is an epistemic or cognitive level that we will always have to do. Then there's an important ontic or ontological level. That is to say, what world does this mind or this Ullam inhabit? What is the nature of that world? How real is it? That the minute we start talking about the mind, we're going to have to deal with this question of what the world around it is, how true or real it might be. Okay? That's 3. 4th, there's a question about states of awareness. What is the range of states of awareness that we're dealing with? Because, I mean, it's a common thing to say in India, but not only in India, that we inhabit various states of consciousness. There's always a kind of range. As it happens, we will be interested here, I will certainly be interested in what I'm calling extreme states. Extreme states of mind. Extreme states could be states of hallucination, of love madness, of possession. There's a range of possible states of awareness, and every time we speak about the mind, we're driven to understand or to attempt to understand these states. It's the standard thing. You know, if we think of the most sophisticated model of the mind that we have, and that's the model that Freud produced in Vienna 100 years ago. Think about the Freudian model. I'm not trying to say it's true or false, but we had a very powerful and sophisticated model of the mind. If we think about that, you'll notice that Freud based his entire theory on states that he regarded as pathological. So extreme states, we may not have to classify them as pathological, but extreme states are going to be of interest to us. As soon as this topic is touched, we are going to be interested in extreme states of mind. We want to see what states of awareness exist. Actually, South Asia in general, in many languages, certainly in Sanskrit, in Tibetan, probably produced the most searching analyses of varying states of mind. There are different kinds of awareness with an incredibly rich vocabulary, which is very precise. Not that we understand all of the terms, but we understand some of them. So states of awareness, okay? That's number 4. And 5th, there's always some question about language, about how we speak about these states of mind, or these elements of the mind, or the cognitive mechanism. There's going to be something about language or grammar. Actually, I have to say the word. We're talking about grammar today in just a moment. We'll be asking ourselves, and we cannot help but ask ourselves, if our language is capable of articulating the kinds of things that we're interested in. If language is commensurate with what we're calling this inner world of mind and feeling. If language is capable of embodying it, articulating it, defining it. What is the role of language? So again, we're going to be asking, what is this subject and how is it put together? What about the cognitive or epistemic relations? What about knowing and perceiving? How do they fit into this model? We are going to be asking ourselves about the nature of the world that this entity lives in, how real it is or unreal. We will be asking about states of awareness and how they relate to one another. And we're going to be asking about language and whether language can make sense of anything. Whether we can actually tell us what we would like to know about that. Okay? Are there any questions about that? There are other questions we could ask. But minimally, we have these 5 areas that have to address. And we'll do it in just
as you say that the body-mind divide does not quite happen before touching onwards.
Yeah.
Then how does it explain the whole notion of hierarchy, social hierarchies, caste system?
I don't think we're going to have to deal with the caste system now because we're still we're at a point where we don't even know what we're talking about. If we want to somehow derive social equivalence from mental models, that's fine, but I don't think we're there yet. So I'd like to hold that question until we actually done some experimentation together with the sources. Anything else? Another question? Anybody else? That's really all I have by way of introducing this topic and the kinds of questions that I think we could do. So this is still probably sounding rather theoretical. Yeah.
I can't agree with you more when you say that this mind-body distinction exists at the same time. But would you then like to say something about the other equally problematic word, the soul?
So now that you've asked that, I was actually saving that for about 10 minutes from now. But you've asked the question. So you know what? I want to talk about early family. And if you open your handout, take the one that begins with the title Ein Guru Nuru. Ein Guru Nuru. Okay? That's the. Yes, it's 10 on the whiteboard. We're going to read that together in just a minute. Okay. So if you turn and just handout, put it on. You should ask. Can I see your handout? Yeah, page 4. Page 4. In the middle of the text. So now please notice that we're now talking about old Tamil and only about old Tamil. Okay, so we're talking about Sangam poetry. I'll give us an introduction to it in just a second. Think about old Tamil from the early centuries AD. So there are a series of words, the different parts of this ulam space. First, there's that word ulam that I mentioned earlier. So there's everything that is inside. We have what is inside the person. And that's called ulam, and the other South Indian languages have equivalent for South Indian. There are other elements that we can identify as belonging to that inner place. You ask about the soul for just a moment, and I'll say something about the absence of a word for the soul. We have other elements. First of all, and perhaps most important of all, is what's called vuya or adi. These are synonyms. For example, vuya is the breath of life, something like prana in Sanskrit. Vuya. So if you're looking for the most fundamental, the deepest part of the person, defining element of a human being, first of all, in Old Tamil, it would be vuya. Vuya, this breath that we are breathing. That is what the person is. Now that breath comes in and out of us and has a certain rhythm to it. Right? You'll notice that the breath, everything alive has that rhythm, not only human beings. Everything has rhythm. Even the gods have rhythm. In fact, the gods breathe in and out, and the way they do that is in some rhythmic form that creates the world. Human beings and other beings seem to be breathing in that same kind of rhythm. There's a kind of harmony between the vuya on the highest level and the vuya on the individual level. So that's very important because that harmony later disappears. We'll be talking about that next week. But in Old Tamil, there's a very deep harmony between my breath, your breath, the breath of the gods, the breath of the animals, the breath of the trees, and quite possibly even rocks and rivers have rhythm. We'll talk about that. But I think quite possibly everything has something. The big question in South Asian systems, generally speaking, whether there is anything that is not alive. It's a real question. I just gave a lecture in the University of California last week about dust. I'm interested in dust. I want to write a small book about dust. Dust, believe it or not, in most of these South Indian systems, dust is alive. It's not a dead thing. It's something alive. We do have a category, classical category, of some things that are inert, jada. Inert, opaque, stupid, foolish, all of this, jada. Right? But most things that are jada, that are inert, can also come alive. And if you read the philosophical texts, you'll see it all the time. Jada is a state which one can emerge from. And like that, vuya. Vuya, we're talking about a force that fills the world, and it fills the person inside. And this force is always a unitary force. It's not broken up into little pieces. It's always some kind of unitary. All right, so we have ulam, we have uya. Uya is the foundational element of the human being. I'm talking about Old Tamil. And we have a number of other terms that we might mention. There's nenjam. Nenjam is the heart. Nenjam. So nenjam, above all, the site of emotional experience, but also sometimes cognitive experience. We'll see it in just a moment. And there's manam, or manas, which was mentioned just a moment ago. So there's a borrowed term, Sanskrit term. Manas is some kind of thinking, cognitive organ. I think I've given you a quote from the Kurundohai where the poet says, Yinya manam, yinya manatai, that is the manas that thinks, it thinks thoughts. So that's a cognitive element. And we could go on like this. There are other words that we could use for different parts of the inside of the human being. For thinking, karute, thinking, thoughts. There are quite a number of words, but one thing that we don't have is a word for soul. Unless somebody can think of a word for soul in Old Tamil. Medieval Tamil is a different story. There are words that are borrowed from different traditions. But in Old Tamil, I don't think that there is such a thing as soul. We have uya, but no soul in any sense that we might recognize. And there's another thing that we're missing. There's another really major concept that is missing. What is that? What else is missing in this case? You know? We talked about uya, avi, nenjam, karate, ulam. But what are we missing there?
God.
God, yeah, God, we have words for God. But that's true, because the God is also
not the same
inside
word.
somewhere. Yeah, yeah, that is true. No, there's a really important word that is missing. By the way, the fact that the word doesn't exist doesn't necessarily mean that the concept doesn't exist. Doesn't necessarily mean that. But still, it's suggestive and interesting for us to know. So what else is missing in this?
Memory.
Memory, we have plenty of words for memory. Thinking, memory, there are various, Nina is in Tamil, plenty of words for memory. Memory is imagination, I don't think we really have in Old Tamil, that's true. It takes a long time until we get the words that we now use. Kalpanai, in the medieval period, bhavana, bhavana. Yeah, that's a long time. I don't think we have it in Old Tamil. Heat is not there, okay, that's true. Consciousness, we don't seem to have it in Old Tamil. That's some kind of cheat or chitta or chaitanya, all of these words, yeah, this I don't think we have in the I mean, I could be wrong. I may have missed it. I don't know, but I don't think we have. But there's a really important concept that we would take for granted that seems to be absent in Old Tamil, and that's the word for self. There's no word for self. That doesn't mean that people cannot say, something about oneself. We have a reflexive pronoun, I. So, okay, we can say things about I myself want to do this or that. But the idea that there is something called the self, whatever we might mean by it, and believe me, it's a very, very complicated term and nobody truly knows. There was a great psychoanalyst, Donald Winnicott, I don't know if you know the name, Winnicott says the self is one of these words that knows more about us than we know about it. That's true, actually. It's a very complicated word. It's not clear at all what the self is. In fact, we may have time, next week, we will have time to talk about different possible models of self. You cannot talk about mind without somehow slipping into talking about the self. And there are interesting questions about whether the self, if such a thing truly exists, whether it's something that is structured, like in Freud's economic model, whether it has actual structure, whether there are things in it, forces in it that we can identify, patterns, a kind of pattern formation, or whether it's a kind of empty space which generates all kinds of other things, something empty in it. Maybe emptiness would be a characteristic of selves, if indeed there is such a thing as self. But whether there is or not, I don't know. But in Old Tamil, there's no word. There's nothing even remotely like it. So that's really important. That's why a topic like models of the mind has some compelling power for us. Because it should, I think, it should undermine some of the axiomatic suppositions, our beliefs, our normal use of language today. We're the inheritors of a long tradition, and that tradition has been formed in the last 200 or 300 years largely by European concepts.
David,
Yeah.
what's the frame for all these terms? If there isn't a self,
Yeah.
that is kind of somehow the self kind of.
There's undoubtedly a notion of a person.
Okay.
There's some notion of a person. And I don't know if I could say this now, or maybe after we read a little bit. Let me just say that there's a very interesting question, very close to what I began with, whether this Wulam thing that we have, whether it's a kind of unified, well integrated entity or not. So we'll talk about this in just a few minutes after we've read something together. I mean, it's a really interesting question as concerns Sangam poetry. Why is that? Here, take an example, just so that you'll see what I'm thinking about. On that same page 4, you have a little poem, if I'm right about this. Yeah. You see, right after this list of words that I've given you, there's this short little poem. This is from the anthology called Turundohai. Okay? Just look at this poem for a moment. This is something that we find in Sangam poetry quite often. Quite often, the speaker in the poem, I'm talking about aham poems, about love poems, I'll explain in a moment. Quite often, the speaker in the poem actually addresses some part of himself or herself, as if it were like separate from it, as if it had some kind of separate life. So very often, it's the heart. Well, here's this little poem. I'll read it in English and then I'll read it to you in Tamil. So many Tamil speakers. Okay. So it's a little tiny poem by Paranar, one of the very great poets. Parana says, it's a man speaking apparently, like a poor man lusting for pleasure, you, my heart, want the impossible. You know that girl is good. What you don't know is that she's really hard to get. So here's a little tiny, simple poem. Just a short little flash of a thought. But listen to how the man says, you, my heart, as if the heart was some independent organ. So you might think, if you read a poem like that, you might, in theory, think, maybe the heart has a life of its own and it's not connected at all, not well integrated at all, not part of an integrated thing. It'd be easy to say that. People always say that about Homer. You read the Homeric Greek. This was a classic idea about Homeric Greek. This is just a brief aside. Please allow me 2 minutes about Homer. Because great scholars, for example, there was a German scholar called Bruno Snell, whose book I recommend to you. It's called The Discovery of the Mind, published in 1946, right after the war. Bruno Snell, N-E-L-L. So Bruno Snell was one of the great classicists of the 20th century, and he proposed that in Homeric Greek, in very ancient Greek, there did not exist an integrated person at all. There was just this kind of loose conglomeration of different pieces, like the heart, achor, and like the kidneys, and like the liver, and the breast also is there. And like that, you can make a list of maybe 6 or 7 or 8 things that exist inside the human being. And in fact, if you read the Homeric poems, sometimes it does look as if the heart was somehow, some independent thing that had no relation to the rest. So that when somebody dies, then this kind of very loose kind of configuration of things, it just flies apart, and the heart goes one way, and the liver goes another way, and the breath of life, psyche, goes off to the world of Hades, the underworld. Bruno Snell claimed that there was no such thing as an integrated person in Homer. That turns out to be completely wrong. There's no question that the Homeric individual is a well-integrated individual. You have to know how to read this. Here is the case where a great classicist made a big mistake, even though it's a very good book, and I recommend the book, especially the later stuff. But one could, just like look at these Tamil poems, and say, wow, the man is talking to his heart. Let me just read you the poem in Tamil. Illon imbam amutlange, arive vettanayam yente kadali, nallal agudal arindange, Arial agudal, arialoye. So this is everyday street Tamil. This is old Tamil. The Tamil speakers really could understand this anyway. It's very simple. Okay? Man is speaking through his heart. But we do that, don't we? Sometimes you say an innocent sentence like, I couldn't do that. My heart wasn't in it. Right? My heart wasn't in it. As if it were something. We speak as if we're giving some independent status to the heart. Like that, it's the same as to an ancient Catholic. That doesn't mean we don't have an interesting question about how the whole thing is held together. We do. So let's look at another example on the next page. 5. Here's another short sentence. Again, apostrophe to the heart. Again, here the poet is speaking to his heart. So there's a kind of dialogue. So 2 parts of the person who are speaking to one another, right? Let's read the poem. This is again Parana. Kurundahai 128. You are like a wingless old heron on the waves of the eastern sea, trying to fish for minnows on the shores of the western sea. Now, to see the image, it's this old bird, so old that even its wings have fallen off, right? And he's on the eastern sea. The Tamil country in those days was the eastern sea, and went all the way to the western sea in Kerala, right? So he says, he's talking to his heart, you're like a wingless old heron on the waves of the eastern sea, trying to fish for minnows on the shores of the western sea. Near Tondi, was the capital of the Kerala king, where the Chera king drives his fine. All you can think about, my heart, now we know who that you is, right? You're like this here. All you can think about, my heart, is that distant woman, utterly beyond you. you're in pain, or rather, pain is who you are. So here's a Tamil poem, and I don't know if you have the experience I do, but these poems, they have a kind of immediacy and freshness, and they feel as if they were written just today. Pain is who you are. Very often you read these poems, they're short poems, you say. Very often you read these poems and you're shocked. You're suddenly shocked to find this thought, which is so beautifully said, beautifully economically said, and so fresh and kind of modern something. This is a very old poem. However, we date the Sangam. You're in pain, or rather, pain is who you are. So again, he's talking to his heart, as if the heart was somebody else. But actually, all of us do have those internal dialogues, don't we? I mean, we're always, I don't know about you, I'm a whole kind of chorus of voices, kind of often disharmonious, dissonant voices, and they come up and they talk to one another. And sometimes I might say, well, my heart does this, and my mind thinks that, and things like that. Okay, so again, I want to say we have these terms, we have various terms that we could use. We could add a few of them if we wanted to spend the time doing that. We don't have a notion of self. We don't have a notion of soul. I'm talking about Old Tamil. And we haven't yet even begun to touch upon the question of how these different parts really hang together. So that's the next thing to do. So now let me say a few words just about Sangam poetry. We're going to take a break in about 10 minutes, okay?
No problem.
Okay? Yeah, please.
Sorry to proceed. So what little time that I know.
Yeah.
In terms of contemporary,
Yeah.
right? These two words that you offer synonyms. Yeah. Weird and art. Yeah. They don't appear to be synonyms to my mind.
Yeah. Modern Tamil is a different story. You're quite right. Do you want to try to define the difference between weird and art?
He said that Adi would be something as close as you could possibly get to some notion of soul. Because it means that Adi is something that's transposable. Something that will leave the body. So my Adi can get into you.
Yes.
Your Adi can get into you.
But you're also continuing.
Oh, I see. Okay. But that's probably yes. So that's the.
But I know why you're saying that, actually. Just tell me your name. I know why you're saying it. Because it's true that Avi in modern Tamil, not even, in fact, even in medieval Tamil, Avi began to, like a magnet, draw to itself notions of something that could perhaps be like a soul. And especially in the Sri Vaishnava tradition, where Avi, in the Sri Vaishnava commentators, they sometimes use it as a synonym for something like Atma, or however else you might put it out. But in modern Tamil too, you can sometimes think that either associate Tamil, very old language. It's an accretion all the time, and nothing is ever really properly lost. Everything grows like that. So yes, you could say that. I would see why. But actually, it's also true for Uyghur. Uyghur also draws that same thing. Okay, so before we take a break, after the break, we're going to read 10 poems together, 10 short poems from Gian Jnu. Let's see what they have to say. Before we take the break, let me just say a few words about Sangam poetry to be absolutely certain that everybody in this room knows what we're talking about. Okay? Probably everybody does. Those of you who already know what I'm about to say, this is a good time to go to sleep. You can take a 10-minute nap. That's a good thing. In the Kudiyatman tradition, it's considered a very benevolent thing to fall asleep during the performance. So, but I have to be sure that we all know what we're talking about. So, we have a large body of poetry, which we call Sangam poetry. We don't know when it was composed. It's the oldest literary texts in South India. We're talking about thousands of verses, some thousands of verses. They're collected in anthologies. There are 8 major anthologies. They're called Sangam because it's a story about 3 academies of Tamil language and literature. Each of them called a Sangam. This is a story. The first 2 were wiped away by a flood, supposedly. The third sat for many years in Madurai, what they call northern Madurai, which is our Madurai of today, near the southern tip of the subcontinent. They call it northern Madurai because there was a thought that there was a Madurai far deep to the south in the sea. So there were these 3 academies, according to the story. But that story is attested for the first time only in the Tevaram poems in the Bhakti tradition of the Shaivas, so around the 7th century. And a poet called Vijnana Sambandha and Appar, another Protestant. So only from around the 7th century do we even have a mention of this idea of the Sangam. And the full story of it, the complete story about these academies where gods and poets and scholars were interacting all the time. That story we get for the first time in a complete version only in the commentary to a book that's called Nirayana Hapurul. This commentary, which was attributed to somebody called Nakira, belongs probably to the 9th century. It's quite late. And nobody knows if there was indeed a Sangam or not. Nobody can say. Not only that, we don't know when these poems were composed. We know they're the oldest poems that we have in South India at all. And there's a body of scholarly opinion that thinks that they were composed in the 1st or 2nd or perhaps 3rd century AD. Actually, if you read the textbooks, that's what they always will tell you these days. Especially in Tamil Nadu itself, people can want to make this a very old book. You know, there's no way, there are reasons to think that that might be true. Especially the 2nd century has some advantages. I'm not going to go into the problems of dating. And there are recent archaeological excavations, actually, which have produced some amazing findings, which might suggest that the earlier dating is indeed correct. Even though these datings, the place called Corunal, these datings, they're carbon-14 datings, and they're not very precise. I'm no archaeologist, but I asked my archaeologist friends to look at the material, and they were somewhat skeptical. So I don't know, but it's possible. And there's a body of opinion that thinks that these poems were composed in the 1st or 2nd or 3rd. I myself think that it's perhaps a little more likely that they were composed a little later, or at least most of them were composed a little later. Or that the early stages of collecting and anthologizing and editing and providing colophons, the first commentaries on the poems, that all of this may have happened around the 4th or 5th century. But we don't know the answer. Okay? So, but these are the earliest poems that we have. The earliest poems from South India. And they're in a particular kind of Tamil, which is continuous with modern Tamil, but also very different from it. So it's a very archaic form. Okay? Now, there's another thing that you have to know about these poems, and that is that we have a grammar, a poetic grammar, which tells us how to read them. So, I mean, this is an amazing thing. Perhaps the most amazing fact about these poems, as we'll see in just a moment, is the fact that all of the poets, without exception, they seem to share this particular grammar, a poetic grammar, which tells you how to make sense of the poem. So how does this grammar work? Again, many of you know this, but I'm going to say in about 2 or 3 minutes how it works, and then we're going to explore this empirically with some poems. The basic idea is the following. There is a division of the world into what is inside and what is outside. Aham and Pura. Aham, everything that is domestic, inside, internal, emotional, cognitive. Okay? Aham. Puram, everything that is outside. So that means external reality. The assumption of the poetic grammar, and we see it already completely set out in great detail in the oldest grammar that we have, an actual grammar book, the Tollkapia, which again we don't know how to date, but let's assume it belongs to these early centuries AD. The assumption is that what happens in the realm of Pura, if it is mentioned in a poem, is going to correspond in non-random and non-accidental ways to what is happening inside, externally. That's a very important principle. Not only that, the Tamil country has been divided by the poeticians, or maybe by the poets, or whoever invented this grammar. We don't know how it was invented. Maybe it's spontaneously crystallized into 5 prototypical landscapes. So I'm just going to quickly run through them. There's the mountain area. It's called Kurinchi. Each of them is named for a flower. The mountain, according to the archetypal narrative of falling in love. And we're talking about the Aham poems now today. So the mountain area is where the Talaivan and the Talaivi, the hero and the heroine, meet and fall in love. and consummate their love before marriage. And I'm sorry to have to inform you, if you don't already know it, that's the only time in the whole life story of these two people which is kind of happy. The rest of it is a kind of sort of rapid deterioration into states that are positively tragic. But there are a few happy nights, at least that. That's called kalavu, stolen love. Stolen love, right? This is a premarital love. Embodied, consummated, lived out, but it's stolen and kind of secret. Yeah? And usually we're talking about a Talaivia heroine who's very young, perhaps 15 or 16 or something like that. The Talaivan may be a little older. So then the next landscape is Mulai, jasmine. That's the pasture lands, these hilly pasture lands. In the Mulai, already we have the first of a series of states of separation. Separation and longing, loneliness, fantasy. So Mulai is what is called iruttal, that is to say, a kind of patient waiting. The heroine, she's waiting for her lover, and he's not gone very far. He's somewhere nearby, but he's no longer showing up. She's at home. Her mother, her father, her foster mother, she has a foster mother. These are all sort of on guard, trying to keep her away from any possible danger, such as meeting with him. But she's longing for him, but she still has some patience. That's Mulai, jasmine. Then we have Nedal. Nedal is Irangal, that is impatient longing. How long can you wait patiently? Time passes, and he's still not come. He's supposed to come back because the idea is that eventually he's going to marry this woman, right? He should marry her. That's the sort of operative assumption. But quite often, even usually, just 1 second, he's not too eager to marry her. Yeah, he's not. It turns, yeah. Okay, so first we have Kurinchi, that is Kalave, that is the stolen love. Then Iruttal, which is the Mulai jasmine, Iruttal. Okay? Iruttal means sitting still and waiting patiently. Now we have Neval. Neval is a blue flower, grows on the seashore. Okay? And that's Irangal, which is impatient. That is the longing has become so terrible that you can't bear it. The truth is that even in Mulai, it's kind of hard to bear. They're not so, but anyway, it's now become impossible for you to get. That's on the seashore. Okay? Then we have what's called Palai. Palai is the desert. Palai, the desert landscape. Like in Ramnath district, if you go on the southern part of the Tamil. So in Palai, there's a very acute, severe, dramatic separation. That is, usually, the most common thing is that the Talaivan lover has gone off, just completely left the whole world of the village and his beloved behind. He's gone off in order to either to study, sometimes to learn, but usually it's to find wealth. He's looking for wealth, and he's gone off alone. So she's left behind, he's in the desert, and the separation is almost absolute and incredibly painful. Sometimes you have a case where the two lovers elope into the desert. She goes with him. And there, still are in a state of separation because both of them have been cut off from their natural home in the village, their parents, their relatives, all of this. So, there's something very important about Palai. This is really important. Please listen carefully. Just 1 second. Okay. Palai, the grammarians tell us, the Totapiam says, Palai is what they call the Narunilai, the middle situation, the middle landscape, the middle term. These landscapes are called Kinai. By that they mean, and this we know from the grammar, that there is an element of Palai in all of the other landscapes, in all 5 of them. That is, even Kalavu, even the stolen love at the beginning in the mountains, even in that Kalavu, there's an element of separation. That separation becoming more and more severe. It's the common nilai, the common state, common to all of these landscapes. So think about what that means. If you think about it for a second, that means that actually at all moments in the life of a human being, something is missing. Something has been lost or separated or displaced. So we're talking about models of the mind, right? here you have, that's how it came up so naturally and empirically, just by telling you the grammar. Here we have what you could call a feature of this inner world of Ulam. Something is missing. Something is felt to be missing, always. And then there's the fifth landscape, which is Marudam. Marudam. Marudam is the delta, like the Kaveri delta, the rich, paddy fields. So you might think this would be a nice place to be, but actually this is the saddest of all the landscapes, because now the hero and the heroine have been married. They came back and married her, but they're quarreling all the time. This is the landscape of quarrel, of Udal. And not only that, but the Talaiman has lost interest in his wife, and he spends his night with these dancing girls in Kordizan, Paratayat. So the typical moment in a Marudam home takes place at dawn, sunrise. The wife is standing at the door of the house, very angry, and the husband is coming back after having spent the night with these Paratayat. Right? That's the standard. That's the end of the story. You can see the course of romantic love, erotic love in ancient Tamil poetry is kind of tragic. There are two other categories, I'll mention them. They're not connected to particular landscapes, but they're categories. One is called kaikilai. Kaikilai is a very complicated term, so I don't want to go into the intricacies of it, but basically it seems to mean a kind of one-sided love. One-sided love, kaikilai. Yeah. But actually, if we had time, we could talk about it. Kaikilai, there's been some very interesting studies of kaikilai recently, especially by a woman called V.S. Rajan, who knows this material very well. But anyway, let us say one-sided love. That's a category that becomes very important in the Bhakti poems, which we'll be talking about tomorrow. One-sided love, this asymmetrical love. The devotee is longing for the God. That's he doesn't come, or only rarely. And then there's a category which again is rather sadly called Perantinai, the big category, the common category, the really dramatic category, what everybody knows. And that's mismatched love. Love which has no, doesn't, the two lovers are not two. That's the big category. Okay? It's called Perantinai. Perantinai is number two. Mismatched love.
So, the thing that you're delineated, and you're talking about models of the mind.
Yes.
So, what model of the mind analogizes or homologizes landscape, state of love,
Yeah.
Social relationship,
Right.
and grammar?
So I'm very glad you asked that question. Actually, that's my question. I would ask you in another 10 minutes or so. That's a very, very important question. What can we learn from this whole grammatical scheme? Look, you can see that ancient Tamil poetry was grammaticalized. That's a really, really important thing. It produced a grammatical system, a language that was shared by all the poets. And in that system, you have a conceptual world, right? So I'll just say one thing and then we'll stop here in answer to your question. But you've asked the main question that we want to ask today, because we're interested in the model of the mind. The one thing that we can say for sure is that the relationship between what is inside and what is outside is felt to be an entirely, let's call it osmotic or permeable relationship. What is inside has its direct analogy or expression or projection, however we want to think of it, outside and vice versa. These are not accidental. That's a very far-reaching principle because we don't usually think like that. Usually we think that there's this outside world and we're wandering around in it and, there's a kind of disharmony between us and the natural world. That's the standard feeling that we have. In medieval Tamil and Telugu and Malayalam, you also get that same dissonance actually. The initial harmony is broken down for a large extent. But in Old Tamil, it's supposed to be a deeply harmonious relationship. So you see, it's enough to mention one element outside, or one name taken from any of these landscapes, or one feature of the landscape, in order to call up that particular kind of love, that phase in the love relationship. That's the grammar. You want to hear one short poem before we break? I'll give you one short poem. Very, almost everybody knows, and probably many of you know it. Let me read it to you first in Tamil, okay? So, Sura Silvanam Sepa Hadar Kurumbu Yellare Porudin Mullai Malarum. If you hear the word Mullai, you know it means jasmine. Mala in Manar. Ayang Diore. Urumi Kori Nerunahar Yambum Yerupula Vidialu Mala. Ahalu Mala. I don't know if the Tamil speakers here could understand. It's a Sangam Tamil. It goes like this. The sun is setting. The sky turns red. The jasmine blooms. Pain gets worse. It's evening. So they say. And they're all wrong. Even dawn, when the cock calls in the wide city, is evening. Even high noon is evening to the lonely. So, yeah. Here again, it's like a modern poem. I've never yet read this poem to some group of people without everybody immediately understanding the feeling. See, look at what this says. Mulai, the classic moment in Mulai is evening, Mala, late afternoon, towards sunset. Most of the Mulai poems are sunset. And that's the time that the jasmine opens up and you can smell the jasmine. And it's in the poem. Right? So the minute you hear the word Mulai in a poem like this, you know that the woman is waiting still patiently, supposedly, for her lover, right? Who's not coming for whatever reason. And she's feeling lonely. And then having said that, that is what the grammar tells us. Having said that, the poet then proceeds to shatter that grammar, break it open. And he says, you know what? Malai, it's the hardest time of the day. Sun is setting, the pain is becoming intense. It's the worst moment in the day. But even dawn is like that evening Malai moment. Even high noon, Pahal, is like Malai, it's like evening if you're lonely. Look how the grammar bursts open and actually transcends itself. That's one characteristic feature of all the South Indian grammars. They always allow a certain space to break through the rules and to reach some other perception or some other goodness. Okay, that's how it works. When we come back from the tea, we're going to read these 10 poems from Gian Jnu. Okay?
So where's the tea? Outside.